Welcome to the Ben Shapiro Show. I am most certainly not Ben Shapiro. I'm Michael Knowles. I'm filling in while Ben continues to make up new holidays. I'm basically going to be here for all of September and October. He might make some new ones in November. A happy Rosh Hashanah to those who are observing today, including Ben Shapiro. I'm actually thrilled that I can be here today because the libs are losing their minds right now, more than I have seen them do since the original Trump election. And they are losing their minds. They're tearing their hair out, rending their garments, and gnashing their teeth because the people of Texas want to kill fewer babies. That's it. It's about this one law that the Texans, through their democracy, have passed. They want to limit the number of babies who will be killed through abortion. And I mean, they're now creating alliances. I'm not joking, with the Satanic Temple, their religious group. It's all very complex on the religious level, on the scientific level, on the political level, on the constitutional level. And so I invited on maybe my most intelligent friend. He's certainly up there. This would be Dr. Spencer Klavan, a man, he holds degrees from Yale University, Oxford University. He's a PhD in classics. He's the associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books of the American Mind. He hosts a podcast called Young Heretics. And he had, to my mind, the most brilliant and astute observation. He tweeted out the other day, quote, loosely quoting, "My entire view of the Texas abortion law is that it is good to outlaw killing the babies." And I thought that I think you got to the heart of it, Spencer. Thank you for being on.
It's a pleasure. Now that you've called me your most intelligent friend, I'm also your only friend. So
it's
congratulations.
True. You happen to be my dumbest friend. You happen
right.
Obviously, you've got this very impressive background. You've read lots of books. And I can't believe that today it requires PhDs and all sorts of fancy thinking to observe that it's bad to kill babies and it's good to not kill babies.
Yeah, on the one hand, the deeper you study, the more you come back to the old truths, such as it's bad to do infanticide. But I'm kind of not joking, because the more I thought about it, the more I thought, like, abortion logic is actually not this new horror. It's just a backslide away from Christianity. And people don't understand this because Christianity is kind of everywhere in America and in the West. It just took over our brains so entirely that it looks like the self-evident thing. But eugenics, right? Sacrificing babies to Moloch, all of these hideous things that we now rightly regard with absolute horror, these atrocities. We had to be taught that they were atrocities by the revelation of Jesus Christ and by many long centuries of Jewish teaching. And the fact that now people are saying, oh, well, actually, we figured out, we can just, if we just kill babies, we can have a society where there's no mental illness and we can have all of these things. If we sacrifice babies to our desire for money, to our desire for beauty, to our desire for power, well, then we can have all of these earthly goods. I mean, this is the oldest idolatry in the book. And, it's been practiced by cultures, some of which we otherwise would admire, like Sparta, for example, practiced a form of eugenics. And so what we need to understand, I think, is that this is the baseline of humanity. The thoughts of man's heart are evil continually. And Isaiah says, woe unto those who call good evil and evil good. And that's, what's happening. You don't even have to be personally a bad guy. If you buy into this logic, you eventually end up on the side of the Church of Satan.
So I guess this is the part that to me is it's so on the nose that I'm sort of scandalized that the left doesn't see it, or the pro-abortion people don't see it. Now, and there was a piece in the Huffington Post about this, the Church of Satan, or the Satanic Temple, I think there's some distinction that I suppose I don't fully appreciate. They are attempting to overturn this Texas law by saying that abortion is the sacrament of Satanism, that killing a baby is the sacrament of Satanism, which is an observation that theologians and philosophers have made for a long time. Peter Kraft famously said that abortion is the Antichrist's perversion of the Eucharist. It even uses the same phrase, "This is my body," which the priest says when he consecrates the host, and the libs say when they defend abortion, "This is my body." So I even saw, unrelated to the abortion law in Texas, there are California Democrats who are having students chant prayers to the Aztec god of war, also a god of human sacrifice. And their argument is, no, it's not real Satanism. No, it's just it's just a clever little devilish joke. No, it's not really praying to the Aztec demon god. But what you're saying is, no, if you do it, if you do these things, if you accept this logic, eventually you really are on the side of Satan.
Right. I mean, the ironic distance gets smaller and smaller. The limit approaches zero as we go. I think there are two philosophers that can help us to understand this. One is St. Thomas Aquinas, a great hero and saint of the Catholic Church. And another is the guys at the Babylon Bee. And the guys at the Babylon Bee, the great satirists of our age, have this running gag that they can't write satire because the world keeps catching up with them, right? They make some joke about, people are going to tattoo their vaccine passports onto their foreheads. Then some guy literally tattoos a vaccine passport on his forehead. The way to understand this is by that older philosopher and theologian, Thomas Aquinas, who says that a small error in the beginning makes a big error in the end. And he's quoting Aristotle there. It sounds simple. It's actually incredibly profound. All he's saying is that the tiniest flaw in logic, sometimes, knowingly committed because we want something that seems nice, eventually spirals out into the worst kind of catastrophe. And that's exactly how this abortion logic works for people who just generally want to be nice. They're troubled by these hard cases, there are hard cases, rape, incest, all these things. And so you come to some Democrat or some politician comes to them and says, it's really about women's autonomy, right? It's my body, my choice. And maybe you can see that actually that completely sidesteps the question, right? That erases the moral debate that we're having about when does personhood begin, because we all agree that personhood is sacred. But you make that tiny, tiny shift because, you want to be virtuous, and you want to be nice to people, and you don't want to seem like the mean conservative. And by the time you're, 10, 20, 30 years on from that shift, you're literally sacrificing babies to Moloch. And this is another biblical truth that we forget, right? Is that we think that evil is something that is extraordinary. It's like out of the ordinary, this crazy thing, this evil person like Hitler, Mao, whatever, Stalin. But in point of fact, it's just the logic of the human heart if you let it play out without guiding it with morality. So small error in the beginning, killing babies in the end.
I think this actually relates to the other big story of the day, which is Afghanistan. And that is that the people who have been supportive of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, ending the forever wars, one of the reasons that I think some people have been really skeptical of the American empire and staying in Afghanistan, for instance, forever, is we don't know exactly what values we are exporting over there. If the value that we're exporting is Christian civilization, well, let's do it, baby. Let's land all over the earth. But if the value we're exporting is abortion or transgender drag queen story hour in Kandahar or something, well, I guess I'm not as interested in doing that. So, I mean, what is it exactly? Some friends of ours and I were discussing the other day on Backstage this issue of abortion in America. I mean, the fact that we kill 1 million babies a year makes you wonder, are we the baddies? Are we the bad guys here? And what does that mean for something like Afghanistan, for an American empire that we don't know whether or not we're really in?
Well, I mean, we're in a really bizarre and interesting, from a kind of academic perspective, an interesting position in terms of the history of great nations, right? There's this old idea, anacyclosis, the cycle of regimes, this Greek notion that you get very strong and powerful and free by fighting back against hard times. And then as you become prosperous, you forget all the things that made you strong and powerful and free. This is called hubris, pride, right? And you do stupid things and you shoot yourself in the foot and you fall back down again. This is this gradual cycle of regimes, overly simplified, but that's the basic idea. usually, right, empire is the thing that your strength wins you. Once you've really worked hard enough, you can conquer and go out and rule the world, and then your hubris kind of brings you to your knees. America is in this weird position where we are kind of building an empire, but we're already at an extreme of decadence. Like our moral compass is so broken that, as you say, we don't know what we're exporting unless it's like, gender and sexuality re-education for the Pashtun.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what we have to offer. And, I'm not a defeatist about America, but if we're going to reach this point, as we have sort of claimed that we did, where we were going to set the terms for the whole world, right? Then we need to get our heads straight about just what exactly the whole world needs to get in line with, because China is over there, like, masculinizing their boys because they're worried that their men are too girly. And this is famously, when this happens, this is part of decadence, right? You enter into a period where you tell men they don't have to be strong, they don't have to be courageous, they don't have to be manly. And then guess what? Some other manlier country or civilization takes you over. And that's basically, unfortunately, the position we're in.
Well, you saw this with the competing army ads. You had the U.S. Army ad where it was this, and the CIA had a similar ad too, where it's these women saying, I'm a proud intersectional Latinx woman. I learned all my fighting skills with the lesbians at the Pride Parade or something. And then you have the Russian Army ad, which is just this like giant, 80s movie villain who's like, he's just like shooting guns and lifting weights. And you think, well, that looks like a country that understands what an army is for, whereas we're sort of unclear about that. And on the point of China now saying, we're going to get rid of the girly depictions of men in movies, and we're going to stop men from playing video games for more than 3 hours a day or whatever, and we're going to instill patriotism. I think that this is kind of the key to it, and people have overlooked that aspect. They said, we're not going to allow these nationalist movies in China anymore. Whereas that seems like those are the only movies that we allow, movies that call men toxic and say that America is awful. So are you telling me, Spencer, you just told me you're not a defeatist, but now I sort of feel like if we're returning to worshiping the Aztec god, things aren't looking great. Give me a little hope in the last 30 seconds we've got, if you have any.
Yeah. No, I do. I do have hope. I mean, I think I don't want to mince words about the forces that you and I are both describing. I mean, it's not, you don't even have to. They're bad, right? It's bad what's going on. It's bad to kill babies. It's bad to do all of these things. That much is I think, clear even to people without PhDs. But here's the hope that I have, and it comes from this passage in Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. This is French Revolution happens before it ever devolves into terror, which it subsequently did. Burke is asked by a young Frenchman, isn't it just great that we are throwing the churches out of our country and we're taking over with just pure liberty and freedom? And Burke says, you may have gotten the wrong impression. You may think that England is on your side, on the side of breaking down tradition. And the reason for that is that a certain very, very loud people, journalists, philosophers, elites, are in these little cadres, and they're the ones publishing the books, and they're the ones going overseas, and they're the ones talking to you. But the English people love tradition, they love God, and they won't stand for this. We are in almost exactly the same situation. The crisis in Afghanistan is an indictment of 20 years worth of failed monoparty ruling class. The same people who are shutting you up indoors, the same people who are closing your churches, those are the people who are failing. Right. The American people are still strong.
That is a great deal of hope, and I actually buy it, of all things. I actually believe it.
Right.
If you're not listening to Spencer's podcast, you're insane, Young Heretics. It is truly, it's the podcast I most listen to of all the podcasts. You can find him at Claremont Review of Books, The American Mind. You can probably find him at your local gym. This is a man who works on all of his toxicity with all the weights, not just of his mind, but his body too. We got to go there. Spencer, thanks for being here. Frankly, I'm grateful for the Jewish holidays where Ben takes off, 6 months of work. I'm really, really glad to be with you all because the news just keeps getting weirder and weirder. So this all began last week when the Supreme Court decided to permit, for now, the people of Texas to pass their own laws to limit the number of babies who are killed through abortion. And the libs lost their freaking minds over this. They couldn't deal with it. They're partnering up with the Satanic Temple right now, for goodness sake, seriously. They are threatening all sorts of federal police physician forces to come in and perform abortions in Texas. I mean, this is really a big deal for libs all over the country. Portland City Council right now is considering an emergency resolution to ban travel, goods, and services from the state of Texas to protest that new abortion law. Last I checked, Portland has some problems of its own. It's basically Antifa headquarters, problems of homelessness, problems of crime. But they're putting that all aside right now to try to ban Texas bourbon, Texas beef, because the people of Texas have decided to kill fewer babies. The statement comes from the mayor, Ted Wheeler, that the intent is to ban Portland's, quote, future procurement of goods and services from city employee business travel to the state of Texas. The Portland City Council stands unified in its belief that all people should have the right to choose if and when they carry a pregnancy, and that the decisions they make are complex, difficult, and unique to their circumstances. Pause it right there. Why is it difficult? Why is it difficult? Because they're saying, we believe everybody has rights. Well, you obviously don't believe the baby has any rights. You believe that women have the right to kill their children, and they have the right to make this choice. Why is it difficult? If you are going to make the argument that the baby's not a baby, the baby is something other than a baby, and it's no big deal to have an abortion, why is it difficult? It's difficult because you know that it's a baby, and you know that it involves ending an innocent human life. And it's difficult because we have our conscience on the one hand that says, don't do this, and we have temptation on the other hand, because this is a fallen world. And so that's the difficulty. And the Portland City Council is weighing in on the side of the devil and saying that the difficulty will be resolved, kill the baby. The ban will be in effect until the state of Texas withdraws its unconstitutional ban on abortion or until it is overturned in court. City Legal Counsel is currently evaluating the legal aspects of this proposed resolution. Now, I'm sure that there are going to be parties in Texas as a result of this resolution. Well, you're telling me that Portland libs aren't going to come to my state anymore? Oh no. Don't threaten me with a good time. I'm sure, frankly, I hope that they boycott Tennessee too. No, definitely don't come here to Tennessee. No, we have all sorts of terrible conservative laws here. You better, ban your travel to here as well. But it's also preposterous. I'm certain that the city of Portland does not ban goods from China. Well, I know that because all of our goods these days are made in China. China commits genocide. China forces abortion. Actually, I guess this is probably on par with the sorts of laws that Portland would favor, that the left would favor broadly. I'm sure that the city of Portland doesn't ban travel or goods from, Afghanistan, Pakistan, any other repressive regime in the world. I remember they did this when there was a bathroom bill in North Carolina. The bill was this outrageous, audacious bill that said that men can't go into the ladies' room. And all of a sudden you had liberal states, including, I think, California, saying that they would no longer pay for travel to North Carolina. Do you think, my goodness, you'll let people go to some godforsaken regime in Africa or the Middle East, but you won't let them go to North Carolina? And it shows you the priorities here. The American left considers its greatest enemy to be the greatest threat to its political agenda, not to be in China, not to be Russia, despite all the fear-mongering about Russia, not to be and it's not the Taliban, it's not in Pakistan. They consider it to be America, American conservatives, traditional Americans who want to preserve the traditional American way of life. Tells you everything you need to know. One of the most jarring aspects of the reaction to the Texas abortion law is that now Democrats are making common cause with the Satanic Temple. Seriously, the Satanic Temple is going to be part of the legal recourse to try to get this overturned. Satanic Temple is going to say that abortion is a sacrament. for them, which we've been saying is true for them for years. Or in California now, they're pushing students to pray to an Aztec demon god. Or here, they're saying that Texas, the good old state of Texas, the greatest threat. I think they need to ask themselves, are we the bad guys here? What side are we on? Who's on our side and who's on the other side? Because it can be a very subtle thing. But if you consider the people of Texas, your fellow American citizens, to be a graver threat than any of our enemies around the world, in China, something is wrong with your philosophy. Probably should fix it. But it's really my distinct pleasure to be with all of you and to be with my next guest, because it has been 20 years since 9/11. I am a native New Yorker. I just flew in actually from New York last night. I remember exactly where I was when the 9/11 attacks happened. My mother was working in the city. I remember she came right back up, and not everyone's parents did come right back up. I guess I was 10 years old, 10 or 11 years old. And so I remember it clearly. But if you were even a couple years younger than I am, you probably don't. I mean, I'm sort of the last age group that really remembers that. And so there are a lot of kids today who are in college, who are certainly in high school, who have no recollection. We're not even alive in many cases for the 9/11 attacks. And so my guest, Knowles Jorgensen, a former New York Fire Department lieutenant, he's got a tremendous new podcast, 20 for 20. You can find it at 20for20podcast.com. To remind people what it was so that we really never forget what happened that day, and especially now as we're debating what our foreign policy should be moving forward. It's very important to remember what happened on that day in the first place. Knowles, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. It's an honor, and glad to be here.
So, Knowles, I can't believe it's been 20 years. I mean, as a political matter, 9/11 is the defining event of my life, and for everyone that I know. And yet it's not a defining event for lots of people who are younger. What are we supposed to remember? I mean, of all the images of that day, of all of the stories that came out, what is it? What are we supposed to remember 20 years later?
Well, I too feel that it's been forgotten. I would love for everyone to remember the sacrifice, the acts of love and kindness, and just selfless, heroic acts. I mean, people who were on duty, who were obligated to go in and rescue people and unfortunately give their lives. But then on top of that was the people who weren't obligated, the many civilians that put their lives on the line to get fellow humans out of those buildings, and the thousands and thousands of Americans that came, that flooded into New York to help, to volunteer, to hand out food, to hand out, water, and just anything they could help in the process. And then, to me, the most significant day was 9/12, when thousands and thousands of people lined the West Side Highway with signs and American flags, and hugging and crying with each other, and greeting the responders as they marched down into their duty assignment. That unity, it's gone, and I don't know why. And I think one of our main goals is to try to bring that sense of unity back as a country. We felt the day of 9/11 was just horror. It was, but then 9/12 started this whole blanket of love and unity, and it's faded away. And we're on a mission to try to bring some great stories out of great people from a cross section of society, of all races and genders, and just who stepped up and did the right thing.
It's funny because I remember it so clearly, but I actually haven't thought about that aspect of 9/11 in the days that followed. All I think about is the horror. All I think about is the images on TV. But what came afterward was certainly the greatest national unity that I have ever seen in my lifetime. And you're right, that has gone away now. And some of these stories, I noticed that you're wearing a cross necklace, and I think of the first confirmed casualty of 9/11 was a Catholic priest, Father Michael Judge. My own priest ran down and saw Father Judge being carried into St. Peter's, First Parish in New York. My priest friend, Father George Rutler, another hero of that day, ran down. He ran from Midtown down to the World Trade Center to give wartime absolution to the first responders who were going in, because he knew, not everyone knew at the time, but he knew it was an act of war that had been perpetrated. And there was, throughout the entire day in the recovery process, there was this, of course, I mean, the defining feature of it was that it was a religious war. It was a religious event. You see it in the first confirmed casualty being a priest, but of course the motivations of the people who flew the planes into the towers. And with so much death, how can you not contemplate mortality, ultimate things? So then what happened afterward? There was a war on terror. We were fighting radical Islamism. But now that we look at the 20 years later, we're pulling out of Afghanistan. What is it? What are we standing for? What happened to the moral clarity maybe that we had in the days after 9/11?
It's a mystery to me, Michael. I don't know. I don't know if this is being done by design or is it just a coincidence, but we've forgotten. I remember seeing signs, and we had shirts made up, "Never forget." But I think a lot of people out there feel that we've forgotten. One of my friends is a veteran who was horribly wounded in Afghanistan, and he's just crushed with betrayal right now. I just don't know. And strange enough is we're not even teaching that day in schools. The beautiful thing about my new hometown of Columbia, Tennessee is they literally call it Patriots Day. 9/11 is a holiday in that town. They closed the town down, and they have a festival of music and love and patriotism. So they haven't forgotten. But on a national scale, it's a mystery to me. And I think what it's coming down to is these warring factions of politicians and community organizers that just, you can't have a say. If you disagree with them, you are shut down. They will cut your legs off. We used to be able to have a dialogue in the country where you and I are sitting now having a conversation, a mature conversation. And, folks might not agree upon everything, but in the past, you would at least accept their thought, process it, and give your thought back. Now, everything's a confrontation. Everything is interpreted as an insult. I think people are just looking for ways to be offended and insulted. What's wrong with showing pictures of those poor people jumping out of the upper floors of the Trade Center? And they're desperate. They were so desperate for life that some of them jumped out with garbage bags and umbrellas, thinking that maybe it could slow them down before they landed. But now we're not even allowed to show those images because they're considered offensive.
Yeah.
But that's American history. Could we not show the bombing of Pearl Harbor anymore because that's offensive? Have we gone that far off the rails? And I just don't know. I'm trying to deliver this straight down the middle because I just want to get a message of kindness and love and goodness out there. But I think there's just people that want to keep this turmoil going. I think there's a lot of people in this country that are benefiting from the anger and the turmoil and the destruction. It has to stop. If we can't unify, we cannot go on as a country. We really won't have a good future if we don't pull this back in the next few years.
Well, I think one of the reasons it's considered offensive to remind people what happened on September 11th is, actually, you just heard this from a school district. They discouraged teachers from talking about 9/11 because it would lead to anti-Muslim racism. As if Islam was a race, by the way, which it is not. It's a religion, not a race.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, you're not allowed to focus on the motivations of the terrorists and then the religious aspect of the war afterward. The other thing that's offensive, I think, to people is mortality. People find it offensive to see people jumping to their deaths or being killed, or first responders. I suspect this has a little bit to do with the hysteria over the last year and a half over the coronavirus, that the people in today's day and age have a real problem confronting the fact of their own mortality, that you will die someday, that your life, maybe there are ultimate questions that you've got to ask. I do think those things are related. But then there's a practical issue here, which is that, of course, someone calling me during our interview, there's a practical issue here as well, which is so many of these people are gone. They're not here anymore. A lot of first responders developed terrible sorts of diseases after working on the pile. And so they just aren't around as much even to tell their stories.
Yeah, Michael, there's actually almost a greater number of responders and recovery workers that have died from 9/11 illnesses than actually died on that day. And that's the scary part about it. I've actually had people tell me, get past it, get over it. It's way in the past. And, that was a formative day in my life. I lost my childhood best friend, John Shart, who was a fireman on duty. And our wives both had children in May of 2002. We both went down there that morning not knowing that our wives were pregnant. And I got the chance to hold my beautiful little girl, my beautiful young woman now, right? But John never got a chance to hold his son, John Jr. And that's a story that needs to be told. I read an article last night in the New York Post, and it was basically how many of the guys were killed that day have now had children come on the department. I think there's like 69 children of firefighters killed on 9/11 that are on the department. A gentleman, firefighter Asaro from Midtown, from Engine 54, Ladder 4, he's got 4 children on the FDNY now that were little kids on 9/11. That's huge. But again, that's a story that won't get told. No one will tell the good that came out of it. And I don't understand that. It's like people are trying to erase this event from history. And it's sad because if my kids didn't have me as their dad, they probably wouldn't have learned much about it either. But I don't say this to offend, but they went to Catholic school, and their particular school is still big on teaching 9/11. And God bless those teachers. They make sure that those kids have a knowledge of it. But some other schools, I just ran into a young 12-year-old girl, lovely, intelligent lady on a plane and was with my family, and she was with her family, and she saw this hat that I'm wearing. And she asked me about it, and she said, "Are you a fireman?" I said, "Well, I used to be, but I had to retire." And she said, "Well, why?" I said, "Well, I have cancer from 9/11. And she said, "Oh, 9/11, what was that? Wasn't that when a plane crashed into a building somewhere?" And I was horrified when I got off the plane because she was an intelligent young person, but she had zero knowledge of that huge monumental day. And it just really galvanized my mission now to get the word out there. And, I used to think I was a New York City cop for 2 years prior to being a fireman. And I proudly served the United States Army Reserves for 8 years. And when I was a young 20-year-old cop in a crack-infested inner city neighborhood, I truly thought I was going to save that neighborhood. And I realized into about the second or third shift, an old timer took me to the side and said, "Kid, it ain't happening." But he says, "You can try to help certain people and get through to certain people, but don't think you're getting through to all of them."
Right.
So I'm hoping that, maybe a few thousand people will listen in, and then maybe they'll tell a few people.
Yep.
And then maybe some of them will say to their kids, "Hey, you know what? You need to listen to this."
Right.
And that's it, Michael. That's what we're hoping to do with this project. Just get good stories out about good people and just ask people to not forget. Don't let your kids forget.
It's truly, it's the Lord's work. You're doing the Lord's work, my friend, as you did on that very day. Knowles Jorgensen. The podcast is available, 20for20podcast.com. Take a listen. Very important. I know a lot of people want to forget for a lot of reasons. Very important that we do not. You do not want to make the same mistakes. Forget these very important, heroic stories of who we are as a country. Knowles, thank you so much for being here.
Michael, thank you, sir. God bless you, and God bless America.
One of my favorite aspects of filling in for Ben is that I get to go into Ben's mailbag and give you the correct answers to your questions. So I'm really pleased to do that. First question up from Steve. Ben, I believe what has been overlooked by national media is that the reason Biden's poll numbers really sank is not because Afghanistan was a mess. Most Americans couldn't find it on a map. It's because the issue put a spotlight on Biden. People who thought of him as the houseplant finally saw the houseplant speak, stutter, stammer, and get angry at Americans for doubting him. The image that was created is gone, and the veil has been lifted. This is very perceptive, and I think there's a lot of truth to this. You're seeing in the Afghanistan debacle the first time that the media are turning on Biden, at least to some degree turning on Biden, and allowing his idiocy and his incompetence and his glibness and his shallowness be exposed. This actually, my criticism here has very little to do with the fact that he's obviously senile and is not up to the job. Joe Biden has always been a doofus, and he's always been a cynical politician. He had a bad academic record, then he lied about his academic record. He's changed his position with whichever way the wind blows. He is a perfect empty suit. And the reason this Afghanistan issue is so bad for him is that the establishment basically wanted to stay in Afghanistan, I think. I think the State Department wanted to stay there. I think the Pentagon wanted to stay there. I think the media largely wanted to stay there. But the American people did not want to stay there. And you see this reflected in both parties campaigning on withdrawal from Afghanistan for a very long time now. And it was Trump campaigned on it. Joe Biden campaigned on it. Obama sort of campaigned on it. He certainly campaigned on ending the wars more broadly. But the ruling class did not want to end the wars. And so Joe Biden goes along with the poll numbers and the people and pulls out of Afghanistan. And it did lead to some genuinely terrible things. I also think the reason that, even if the media did want to flag for Biden in Afghanistan, the reason it doesn't work is 13 dead Marines still mean something in the United States. Even as far gone as the country is, the American people really don't want to see their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines being killed needlessly. And that's a big problem. And even if the media were going to cover up, it's not going to happen. But I agree with you. I think it was not so much a turning point as it was an exposure of the incompetence that plagues the administration and has from day one. Nick writes, "Hey Ben, my wife is currently pregnant with our first child. As a father, do you have any advice for parents on newborn clumps of cells?" I do, actually, and it's related to the way you phrase that, which is treat them like babies. They're like people, you know. There was, in the wake of this Texas abortion law, the left has become hysterical about killing babies. There was a doctor in Texas performed 67 abortions in 17 hours before the law went into effect, like Mengele. I mean, like a demon. He killed as many babies as he could in the hours where that was still legal. And there was another doctor, this woman, Dr. something Cass, who's blue check mark and, you know, goes on TV sometimes. Although it's funny, she asked if I would invite her onto my show because I criticized her. I did invite her on, and then she ran away and refuses to come on because there's no answer here. I mean, there's no, the pro-abortion people have no argument. And so they have to just rely on these silly sorts of slogans. But, you know, in response to the people who say, what are women going to do? What are we going to do now that, I know one answer is, you know, wait until you're married to have sex. That's good advice. Some people have been saying, well, you should use contraception, which, you know, a lot of people just don't want to do that. Catholics, for instance, can't do that. But here's my suggestion. What if you just have babies? What if you just have the babies? Babies are good. We have a dying civilization. In normal civilizations, people just have babies and they enrich your lives and do that. So congratulations. That's all my advice. And also be nice to your wife so that when you refuse to wake up in the middle of the night, she doesn't kill you. That's my other advice. Let's see. Next question up is from John. Hey, Ben. I remember seeing a guy holding a sign in front of a CVS claiming that the vaccine is made from abortions. I did a little research on this, and it's not made from abortions, but seemingly has an indirect connection to it. Can you clear this up? Second thing, when creating travel plans, is there a different way to evaluate vaccination status and masking up in a different country, like a country with a lower vaccination rate or higher case death rate or stricter laws, not regulations? Love you, no homo. Thanks. The guy in front of the CVS with the sign is right. The vaccine is made as a result of abortions. And so for some of the vaccines, the fetal cell lines derived from aborted babies were used in the development of the vaccine, but not necessarily in the production of the vaccine. But for some of the vaccines, the aborted babies, stem cells derived from aborted babies, were used in the production of the vaccine as well. So there are different degrees depending on which vaccine you're looking at. Now, the reason that, for instance, Catholic bishops have said it's okay to get the vaccine, and the Pope even has said that, is because they're saying that the complicity in the abortion is less direct. It's not as though a baby was killed yesterday and then they made a vaccine. It's that these babies were killed decades ago and these cell lines have been kept alive. And so they're saying that the participation is less direct. But you can trace it back. It's pretty clear. And I think this is why people have religious objections to it. And they're saying, I don't want to be associated with this at all. I don't want to participate in this in any way. But do not let the establishment lie to you about it. They're really trying to cover up the fact that these vaccines were developed in this way. There's a lot of lies going on about the coronavirus. There's a lot of fake news out there. And so you can't believe everything you read in the papers, certainly not if it's coming from the establishment. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. We'll be back.